We tend to assume that society moves in one direction. More equality, more awareness, more progression with every generation. And for a long time, I think the story that we have told ourselves is that the younger generation are the most progressive. But recently, there has been a survey that I think has shocked a lot of people, and it definitely challenges that idea in a pretty uncomfortable way. Because according to some new research, some Gen Z men are expressing a lot more sexist views than against baby boomer men. Some Gen Z men are expressing some very sexist views towards women compared to the baby boomer generation. The same generation that many people associate with some very outdated views. And before anyone clicks off or says that this video is a all men are bad video, that definitely isn't what this video is about. I don't want this video to be about blaming an entire generation, and it definitely isn't about shaming young men. And I also don't want it to think that people are assuming that old people always have it right. That isn't the stance I want to take. What this is about is trying to understand why measurable misogynistic views amongst young men are on the rise at probably the exact moment we are expecting them to be disappearing.
Teachers in the UK have been trying to warn you that sexist and racist behaviour is increasing in schools. And it's not just about cheeky comments or banter. Reports show that staff, especially women, are confronting behaviour that feels entitled, incredibly degrading and dismissive. Social media influence is part of it, and absolutely it is, but this is a deeper pattern about power and institutionalized power that brings us back to how man understands misogyny.
Because we are definitely not just speaking about some vague opinions here. We are talking about things like women should be obeying their husbands, beliefs that women shouldn't initiate sex, and growing numbers of young men who believe equality has gone too far. And whether people like that or not, views like those are going to be damaging. They have some really real social consequences.
Okay, these are some things that are super misogynistic that you probably have never even realized before. And it needs to stop. When guys only respect women that they find attractive. The fact that being called too girly is an insult, but if a guy is too manly, it's praised. Fangirls are called crazy or insane, but if a man is a huge fan of a sports team, he's called loyal. When a guy buys condoms, it's a good thing, and it's safe, and it's smart, and it's being responsible and being educated. But when a girl buys condoms, it's like inferred that she's an SLUT. You should really smile more. Diaper changing stations only being in women's restrooms. The fact that I literally can't go out alone when it's nighttime. Also, I'm not hating on men or blaming men or anything. I'm literally just stating the facts, and it's pathetic.
Obviously, I do want to start by saying I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or any type of ologist. I'm definitely not here to try and diagnose a whole generation through a YouTube video, but I am taking a real big interest in this research and really observing what is going on online. And I think a lot of it is curiosity, because this isn't just about one big headline. I think this is a much bigger problem, because if misogyny is resurging in new forms, the question isn't just who's to blame. The real question is why now? Why are young men, those who grew up around conversations about equality and about rights for women and all these things, why are they increasingly drawn to these conversations and ideas that place women back in restricted roles? And most importantly, are these ideas just coming out of nowhere, or are they being shaped algorithmically, slowly, and very deliberately by the online environments that young people are growing up in today?
As a man, it's player versus player. It's ultimately competitive. And as a man, you have to outcompete the other men who are prepared to get up and do it anyway. That's how it works. There's no such thing as saying, I'm sad, I need 2 weeks off. Not as a man if you want to be important. Maybe as a chick, you can always put more foundation on and be hot again. Great. Not as a man. If you want to be important as a man, you have shit to do. You have duties. This is how it exists. This is how it's always been.
You know, men build, invent, build, and maintain society. That's a fact.
Don't women do that too?
Look around. Can you name anything that a woman has invented and built in our plain sight?
Around here?
Nothing. Men built all these buildings. They engineered them, they designed them.
Do we definitely know that?
It is a fact.
There are many...
And there's nothing wrong with that, though.
In this video, I really want to unpack what the survey actually said, why these attitudes might be changing across different generations, how online culture and these influencer ecosystems are really having an impact, and also why framing this as traditional values might actually hide something a lot more concerning and showing more about sexism and misogyny in a new digital era. Understanding this isn't about some gendered war. It's about understanding the culture we are living in. And then, of course, where it might be heading next.
Some of the most misogynistic men were raised by single mothers, women who have grafted and sacrificed so many years of their life to try and give their children a better life, to try and fill the void that a father has left behind. These men will repay that by going ahead and projecting their unprocessed trauma onto other women. On the flip side, I know that there are a lot of single mothers who have sons who absolutely adore women, but it's interesting to see how one side can adore women and understand the sacrifices that a woman has made for you, and in turn appreciate that, and another side will internalize an unprocessed trauma and project that onto women. A lot of these men have become influencers and influence young men to hate women. The rhetoric, this language, this dehumanization of women is so harmful because it further contributes to the rising violence against women. Women overwhelmingly suffer violence at the hands of men. They are overwhelmingly in domestically abusive relationships. They are overwhelmingly killed by men. Boys who internalize misogyny spewed by them by men with influence who are exploiting these young men. These boys grow up to become men who harm women.
Let's get into it. Before we do fully get into it, please be sure to subscribe down below and like the video. We are on the road to 1,000 subs and I would love for you to join along, so hit that subscribe button and let's get into the video. Before we talk about all the ins and the outs, I do want to just talk about the data as it's been presented. I think to understand the conversation you need to know the facts. The study itself compared data from Gen Z and Baby Boomer, which I believe is about the 1940s to 1960s era. And the survey was comparing views across things like relationships and gender beliefs. And the results were surprisingly stark. One of the most talked about findings was this: a significantly higher portion of Gen Z men believed that wives should obey their husbands compared to the baby boomer generation. Now, I just want you to pause there for a second. I think this really challenges a cultural assumption we've had for years that these younger generations are more open and a lot more equal as the generations are going on, but it didn't stop there. Attitudes towards sexual norms had an even bigger generational divide. According to the survey, 21% of Gen Z men believed that a woman should never initiate sex. Amongst baby boomer men, that number dropped to just 7%. I wouldn't say that's just a small difference. That is a threefold increase in support of an idea deeply rooted in rigid gender hierarchy, one that positions male desire as active and females' desires as passive. And then there's the perception of equality itself. When asked whether men are expected to do too much for gender equality, 59% of Gen Z men agreed, compared with 45% of baby boomer men. Even amongst the women, there was a generational divide. 41% of Gen Z women had agreed that the equality expectations had gone too far, compared with just 30% of baby boomer women. So it doesn't just sound like it's a disagreement between men and women. It's a broader generational tension about what equality should look like. And I think this is where the framing of it really matters, because I think these attitudes are really softened in digital media as some sort of traditional values.
Like, reframe this as in it's a man's job to protect and provide and go make money, not a woman's. Now, again, I am sensitive to the fact that we live in a new world, but the problem is that women prioritize earning money, being a 304, living their life, having fun over having a family, and I think that causes long-term problems for them. And it's because of this mindset of, well, why do I have to go make a sandwich? Does that, like, am I less than you? No, we have different roles. And I think motherhood is one of the best things a woman can do, not a career.
But I think by calling them that, you're really sanitizing what these beliefs actually mean. We aren't talking about preferences for your family dinners or even your roles in your relationship. We're talking about ideas that assign authority, sexual agency, and social power that people want assigned differently purely because of gender. That isn't nostalgia, that's sexism. I think the most uncomfortable part is that these views are growing amongst people who have grown up learning about the importance of equality, consent, and gender awareness. So I think the question starts to become, if these younger generations had more exposure to equality messaging than anyone before, why are some young men now moving in the opposite direction? Because surveys don't create beliefs, they are revealing patterns that are already existing. And to really understand those patterns, you really have to look beyond the statistics and look into the cultural environment that is shaping how men view masculinity in practice.
This is all we want. We want a man who acts like a man, who's manly, who takes care of things. Leader. Who I don't need you to kill an alligator with your hands, but I need to feel so feminine around you because you are so masculine that I can turn my brain off because I know you've got it. Yeah. I trust you. I trust your intellect. I trust your character. I trust that I can close my eyes and follow you blindly and I'm going to be happy about where I end up. That's what it's about. We go out. I don't have to use my brain. I don't have to think. You know what I mean? Order the whole thing for us. Take me, plan the thing. Say you tell me where we're going and we're all set.
Anytime you put boundaries or standards on female behavior, they're going to label it as insecure, toxic, misogynistic, or controlling. One more time for the fucking guys who are listening to this. Anytime you put boundaries, standards, or on how women should behave, especially when it comes to their modesty, etc., if you put boundaries on it, as a man, as her man especially, they're going to say that's toxic, misogynistic, controlling, blah, blah, blah. But what guys need to understand is that don't follow, that's like Matrix talk. It's bullshit. You need to stand firm on your principles and be like, this is unacceptable. I don't commit to girls that do X, Y, Z, which is typically the behavior that she's exhibiting. And if she says, well, I'm going to do it anyway, well, you know how much respect she has for you. And then you cut the relationship. Or she goes into the sex only category and you no longer take her seriously. The problem is that guys let women behave the way that they want and they're not willing to put boundary standards and, most importantly, consequences on their fuckery. Once you put consequences on women's fuckery, they instantly start to respect you.
So if these attitudes aren't completely random, then where are they coming from? Every generation is molded around the media environment they are brought up around. And Gen Z men are probably one of the first generations to really have their ideas around social norms sculpted by the digital era, fully online, not by teachers, not by parents, not even by traditional celebrities, but by algorithms. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and streaming platforms, these all don't just show content. They learn what keeps people watching, and then they will slowly push material that is more emotionally engaging for that viewer. And I think one of the most powerful engagement metrics that we have seen recently, and I mean, we've discussed it on this channel, is outrage. Outrage drives engagement, and this is exactly where the influencer ecosystem comes in. Over the last few years, we have seen a very specific genre of influencer content coming out, and that is the manosphere. Online spaces centered around masculinity, dating advice, self-improvement, and gender dynamics. I think on the surface, some of this does look really harmless. You know, we are seeing advice about fitness, about self-confidence, financial independence, self-discipline on their own. These are very good things. And some of these things that many young men might be lacking guidance on. But the issue isn't that these conversations are being had, it's where they often end. Because I think within many of these spaces, personal frustration is gradually getting reframed as gender disparity or gender conflict. Loneliness is becoming the women's fault. Dating struggles become evidence of some sort of female manipulation. Social change becomes proof that men are being easily replaced. And I think once that type of framing gets presented, sexism isn't being presented as hatred, it's presenting itself as logic. I think a really big turning point in this shift is people like Andrew Tate.
Anyone who does not drive a Ferrari is a lazy idiot. It is that easy to get rich in the world today.
Whose content was rapidly going through all the different social media channels. I think what made this really different from older forms of misogyny was just the accessibility of it. You didn't have to seek it out. Teenagers scrolling for some gym advice or just some general motivation could encounter short, confident sound bites presenting some really rigid gender hierarchies as fact. posts, often packaged with luxury imagery, humour or motivational language. And sadly, algorithms don't evaluate ethics. They evaluate engagement. So controversial opinions, especially ones that spark arguments, travel further than nuanced conversations ever could. The result is an environment where extreme certainty gets rewarded while complexity gets buried. And I think for young men who are trying to figure out identity, relationships, and purpose, that certainty really becomes appealing because, let's be honest, uncertainty is very uncomfortable. Simple answers are not. I think something that is really important to understand here, I don't think a lot of the men looking into these spaces are misogynistic. They aren't looking for misogyny, they are looking for belonging. They're looking for explanations for their problems. They're looking for some sort of explanation and guidance on how to navigate a world where traditional markers of masculinity may feel unclear for them. But I think when those answers are constantly framing women as adversaries rather than equals, of course the attitudes are beginning to shift. I think they are somewhat slower and subtle, and I don't think people were realising that this was becoming a problem. So I think when there are surveys showing that Gen Z men are more misogynistic, it may not be a sudden cultural reversal. It may be the outcome of years of social, online, digital environments where gender conflict is not only normalised, it's monetized. I think, again, this brings up another hard question of, if online culture is reshaping masculinity, why are these messages resonating in the first place? Why are some men so receptive to it all? If misogynistic content is spreading online, we do need to ask why some men are so receptive to it in the first place.
No, it's only bad for certain people. Here, like, there's women, you agree, who have orgasmed during essay.
That has nothing to do with whether it's essay.
Bro.
That has nothing to do with whether it's essay. Are you kidding me?
Bro, I didn't say whether or not it's essay. I said during essay.
And ignoring the unresolved underlying problem there, it doesn't resolve sexism, it just makes the conversation more polarised. A lot of young men are growing up in an era of a lot of change. The expectations around masculinity that existed for generations, provider, authoritative figure, emotional restraint, they have been challenged, redefined, or completely dismantled. And of course, that is a good thing. We are pushing for more emotional openness, more equality in relationships, more freedom to identify our gender or our beliefs outside of rigid gender roles. But with any social change, there becomes a gap. The old rules do disappear long before any new rules really fill that space. And I think for some men, that gap feels less like liberation and more like confusion. They're told to be emotionally open, but they still need to be confident, to reject toxic masculinity but still be attractive and successful, to support equality but without really understanding what their role looks like within that. So I think instead of clarity, a lot of people are facing uncertainty. Add that to this rising idea of loneliness amongst young people, economic instability, expensive housing, and the awful pressure of constant comparison on social media. I think you end up with a generation that is really looking for some sort of direction. And of course, this is where the influencer ecosystems are becoming very powerful, because they do offer some sort of certainty. There's clear rules, clear hierarchy, clear explanations for why life feels so challenging. The problem is that some of these explanations that are being given are redirecting any hate, frustration towards women, feminism, or social progress itself. This is often described as toxic masculinity, but I think that phrase sometimes gets misunderstood. Toxic masculinity isn't saying that masculinity in itself is toxic. It's describing a version of masculinity that is built on dominance, emotional suppression, and ultimately control, where vulnerability is weakness and equality seems like some sort of loss.
So a recent survey from the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership has found that almost half of Brits believe to promote women's equality has gone far enough.
I'd be quite interested to know, for the people who genuinely do believe that, Could they point somewhere where we're equal? By the way, I think it's really important to celebrate progress, and we have come so far. But remember, we've come so far because people have fought and died in some instances to get us there. But in no category, whether it's business, health, when we're not equal. We've got the gender pay gap, we've got the pain gap, the pension gap. 40% of MPs are women, which is amazing, but it's still not representative, which means that men are still making policies about women. We've seen, with the reversal of Roe versus Wade.
And when young men feel powerless or uncertain, messages promising some sort of resolved status or control can feel really reassuring, even if those messages are relying on sexist assumptions. I think also what makes this moment so vast is just the scale of it. Baby boomers didn't just grow up with this around them 24/7, with algorithmic communities constantly pushing it towards them, whereas Gen Z does. A teenager could literally go from watching fitness content to then relationship advice to some really increasingly extreme gender commentary, all within the space of an afternoon, and all without actively searching for it. I don't think confusion around masculinity inherently causes sexist views. I think there is a part of the conversation that is going slightly wrong. When you do have conversations around these types of things online, I think they start to get viewed as traditional views.
Sterling, how would you want your relationship to work? I bring the cash in, I put a roof over her head, put food on the table, I make sure it's all taken care of. I steer the ship, I have a direction, I know where we're going, I know what the plan is. Yeah. I'll educate and indoctrinate my kids when they come out. Her job is just peace and comfort, keep the house comfortable, peaceful, don't add drama. Primarily don't add drama. What happens when you do something to piss her off? I'll piss her off all the time. Then she gets to just be peaceful. She can't complain? You can complain to her friends, well.
They are framed as ideas returning back to traditional values. And on the surface, I think it does sound somewhat neutral, almost comforting maybe. Traditional suggests stability, family, history, something familiar. But I think that framing does quietly change how we are viewing it and talking about it. Because when those beliefs are including ideas like women need to obey their husbands, women are being discouraged to express their sexual agency, or equality being framed as unfair to men, we aren't talking about harmless tradition. We're talking about gender hierarchy. And I think calling that traditional values risks softening the reality of what those beliefs really look like in practice. Language really does matter because it shapes accountability. If something is framed as traditional, it seems a lot more respectable. If it's framed as opinion, it is framed as being something debatable. But if it restricts autonomy or reinforces unequal power balances amongst genders, then I think the more accurate word is sexism and sometimes misogyny. I don't think it means that every person with these views are hating women. I don't think misogyny is always loud or aggressive. I think sometimes it is subtle. It shows up as expectations rather than hostility. Ideas about who should lead, who should follow, who should initiate, who should remain passive. And historically, these expectations have limited women's rights, socially, economically, and personally. So when surveys are showing that younger men are agreeing with statements that are reinforcing those stereotypes and beliefs, the concern isn't nostalgia, it's regression, because progress towards equality has never been automatic. Every gain, working rights, workplace equality, reproductive autonomy, happened through active social change, not generational inevitability. And of course, history does show that progress can stall, or sadly, even reverse. What makes this moment a little bit more complicated, I think, is that modern misogyny doesn't always look like the past. It isn't always overt discrimination. Sometimes it's framed as self-help, sometimes as dating advice, sometimes as just asking questions. It's adapting to modern language while keeping those older power structures underneath. And that's really why I don't think this conversation is about being traditional versus being modern. It's about recognizing when inequality is being repackaged in ways that are more socially acceptable in the modern world. Because if we mislabel the problem, we then misunderstand the solution. And that brings us into something really important, how these ideas are showing up in mainstream media and real life conversations right now.
So a student of mine was very unhappy with the grade that he got on an assignment. And he tried to go back and forth about why he got the grade. And I said, look, I'm not going to keep going back and forth. The grade is staying. And his response was, that's not what this is. I don't go back and forth with females anyway. And I had to correct that immediately. I'm not a female. I am a woman who specifically is your teacher. Female is a derogatory term. I don't care how you want to spin it. And he knew it was a derogatory term. That's why he used it in the context that he did. The red pill misogyny that is online everywhere is leaking into our classrooms. And in a field where majority of teachers are women, it's obviously going to lead to tension in the classroom. So check your child's misogyny, or I'm going to do it for him.
I think one reason this conversation is feeling a lot bigger than just some internet discourse is because it's no longer just confined to online spaces. It has started showing up in mainstream media. Recently, as a lot of people have heard about, Louis Theroux has made a documentary exploring online masculinity culture and the manosphere.
I'm not doing it for fucking fun. Not what my daughter will be involved with. I'd disown my daughter, like.
Would you?
Right, if she done something like that.
Come on, that's easy to say.
Same way if my son come out gay.
Well, seriously, being gay nowadays is considered quite normal.
Not my son.
Why?
Just not my son.
And I think what makes Louis Theroux's content really interesting is he just lets them talk. He doesn't argue with people. He just listens. He spends time with young men who follow these movements, talks to the influencers themselves, and he really tries to understand why these messages are resonating instead of just dismissing them. And I think something that is surprising in this documentary is that a lot of men don't see themselves as sexist who are holding these beliefs.
You consider yourself a misogynist? No, because misogyny would be the hatred of women. I would argue I love women and I actually understand them. So since I understand them, I know what's best for them.
You think you know better than they do?
Yes, in many ways, yeah. And that's how women want it. They want a guy that can lead them and dominate them.
They see themselves as reacting to a world they feel excluded from. Some talk about loneliness, some talk about dating anxiety, some feel confused about what masculinity is supposed to look like now. But alongside those vulnerabilities, you also hear beliefs about women that reinforce control, distrust, or hierarchy. And that contrast is important because I think it shows how misogyny today doesn't just come from confidence or dominance. Sometimes it grows out of insecurity, out of frustration, searching for explanations. This documentary really highlights how some of these personal struggles can transform into some sort of shared ideology. Individual disappointment becomes a collective narrative. And I think once that type of narrative forms, it's then very hard to challenge. I think what struck a lot of the viewers wasn't just the influencers themselves, it was the people who follow along. These weren't some sort of villains, these were just young men trying to find answers. And I think that's when the results from that survey at the beginning don't feel as surprising. The internet doesn't just reflect culture anymore. It does actively shape it. And when documentaries, surveys, and everyday conversations are all pointing towards a certain direction, it suggests we are no longer looking at isolated incidents. We are looking at a broader cultural movement. So, is misogyny evolving rather than disappearing? It's not just that young men hold sexist beliefs. It's that misogyny is finding new ways to survive and even thrive in a world that on paper should be more equal than ever. Some people might call this a backlash, but I think we need to be careful with that word. What it suggests is that social progress can then provoke resistance, sometimes subtle, sometimes amplified online, especially when people feel unsure, excluded, or disempowered. We really need to create a starting point for these conversations to better education and really cultural reflection. We can't ignore these patterns. The conversation is becoming reactive, polarized, and just dismissive in some places. I think we really need to pay attention to these online communities and how they are shaping conversations around masculinity. Recognize when beliefs about gender are rooted in power rather than preference. Encourage some really open and honest conversations about equality without shaming anyone involved. So my camera died, then my storage was full, and I've just had to wait another day and start filming. So I'm going to finish off this video now, but that's why there is a big change in the situation. We do also need to really be encouraging some very open and honest conversations about gender equality, and really without shaming anyone, but offering insight. I do think we also need to be supporting spaces where these young men can explore their own identity safely, critically, and without any misogynistic narrative really driving the conversation. Calling out sexism isn't punishing curiosity, but we have to highlight these patterns and how they cause real life consequences. And ultimately, I hope this video can do more than just presenting you a survey and some numbers. I hope it really makes you kind of ask some of these questions. How are we socialized to see gender roles? How does online culture reinforce these patterns? And how can we really create these environments that foster equality and open conversations and just critical thinking instead of hierarchy and power dominance? Misogyny doesn't have to be inevitable, but we need to see it clearly and call it out, and we need to be able to name it and understand it. Thank you guys for watching this video. I would love to hear your thoughts about this in the comments down below. Not necessarily if you just agree or disagree, but do let me know the patterns you have noticed, what you think is helping or hindering the situation, and what you think we can do to make gender dynamics safer for everyone involved. If you did find this enjoyable or useful, please be sure to subscribe down below and like this video. It does really help the channel. I appreciate you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.